Close your eyes for a moment and just feel what is already there, even before you try to explain it. That tightness in your chest, that quiet pull inside you that has never fully left. It has a name attached to it, a face you can still see without effort, a voice that seems to echo in the softest parts of your memory when everything else goes silent. You didn't consciously choose to keep thinking about them. It was never something you scheduled in your mind or decided to hold on to. It simply happened, slowly and silently, until one day you realized they had become part of your inner world. They exist now in the space between your thoughts, in the pauses between your breaths, in the stillness you feel when the world is no longer demanding anything from you. There are mornings when you wake up and before anything else can reach you, it's them. Not as a clear memory, but as a feeling that arrives first, like it was already waiting for you there. And there are nights when everything gets quiet enough that you hear them again, not through sound, but through presence. Like something unspoken follows you into the dark and sits beside you when no one else is around. And maybe you've asked yourself more times than you can count, why this one person? Why does your heart respond to them in a way that logic cannot fully explain? Why does something in you still recognize them even when your mind tries to move forward, tries to detach, tries to convince you that it should not matter anymore? If these words have found you right now, it is not by accident. There is a deeper timing at work here, something that doesn't operate through coincidence the way we usually understand it. When two inner worlds are connected in a way that carries meaning, life has a way of repeating reminders until you are willing to see them. Because when two souls are written into the same story, what we often call destiny does not arrive loudly. It leaves subtle traces, it leaves patterns, it leaves what feels like fingerprints on moments that should have been ordinary, but somehow are not. And what I want you to understand is this. Sometimes connection is not measured by presence, but by persistence. Not by how close two people remain physically, but by how deeply they continue to exist within each other's inner experience, even after distance has taken over everything visible. So today, there is something I want to help you recognize more clearly. There are certain signs that appear when two hearts are not simply passing through each other's lives, but are instead connected through something deeper, something that does not dissolve easily with time. Not fantasy, not confusion, but patterns that repeat in a way you cannot ignore. The first sign is simple, yet unsettling in how persistent it is. The thread between you never truly breaks. No matter how much time passes, no matter how much distance grows, no matter how many attempts are made to mentally move on or emotionally detach, something remains intact beneath it all. It does not always feel dramatic. In fact, it is often the opposite. It is quiet, subtle, almost easy to dismiss until you start noticing how often it returns. There are connections in life that do not obey the usual rules of distance. They do not dissolve just because communication stops. They do not disappear just because new people enter your life. They do not fade simply because you decide they should. You can go through long periods without speaking. Entire seasons can pass where there is no contact, no message, no visible sign of their existence in your daily world. And still, something in you remains aware of them in a way that feels strangely consistent, as if your inner awareness never fully let go of the signal. You might try to bury it under distraction. New conversations, new environments, new versions of yourself that you hope will feel less attached, less affected, more free. And for a while, it may even seem like it is working. But then something happens that you cannot plan for. You are in a crowded place surrounded by noise, movement, and faces that have nothing to do with your past. And suddenly there is a shift inside you. No reason, no trigger you can clearly identify, yet something in you reacts as if it has recognized something familiar. Or you are alone in a quiet moment, doing nothing significant, and their presence returns without invitation. Not as a physical image, but as a feeling that rises from within, as if memory has its own intelligence and chooses when to speak. It can feel like their energy finds you, even when there is no logical pathway for it to do so. Like light slipping through a window you didn't realize was still open. Like something between you continues to exist outside the limits of time and space as you normally understand them. And this is where confusion often begins, because the mind tries to explain it in practical terms. It tries to label it as habit, attachment, unfinished emotion, or simple overthinking. But the experience itself does not always behave like something that can be neatly categorized. This is not madness, and it is not your mind playing tricks on you. This is recognition, something deeper than memory, something that feels like remembering without knowing when the remembering began. Because when two people are meant to cross paths in a meaningful way, even separation does not fully separate them. In some quiet, unexplainable way, they continue to exist within each other's inner world. You carry traces of them in places no one else can see. In the music that suddenly becomes heavier than it used to be. In the streets, you can no longer walk the same way. In the way certain sentences feel different now because they once came from their lips. And what makes this experience both painful and strangely sacred is how it behaves when you try to release it. Every time you gather yourself and decide to move on, every time you try to close the chapter with discipline and distance, something unexpected happens. Life responds. Not always loudly, but precisely enough for you to notice. You see their name where it should not be. You hear a familiar sound in a passing conversation. You catch a detail in a random moment that feels too aligned to be meaningless. You dream of them so vividly that when you wake up, reality feels slightly out of place. Like you've returned from somewhere that still feels real. And slowly, it begins to feel as if forgetting them is not a straight path. It is not something you can simply decide once and complete forever. Instead, it becomes something that moves in cycles, where absence and presence keep exchanging places inside your awareness. These moments are often dismissed as coincidence by the mind because the mind needs order. It needs explanations it can control. But what you are experiencing does not always fit neatly into logic. It behaves more like resonance, like something within you is still tuned to a frequency that has not fully gone silent. And here is the part that feels both unbearable and strangely tender at the same time. It can feel as if losing them was not the end of the connection, but the moment you began to understand how deeply they had already entered you. Because some connections do not ask permission to stay. They do not depend on daily contact. They do not dissolve just because time passes. They continue in a different form, less visible, but not necessarily less real. They exist in a space that feels beyond measurement, beyond time as you normally understand it, beyond logic that demands closure. And sometimes the most difficult truth is not that someone left your life, but that something in you never fully registered them as gone. And then there is something else unfolding underneath all of this, something even more intense, even more transformative. The second sign is this. They do not just touch your life, they open it. They break something in you, not to destroy you, but to reveal you. Real connection, the kind that carries depth and consequence, does not arrive only to comfort you. It arrives to awaken what has been sleeping inside you. And when someone is deeply aligned with your inner world, they do not simply become a part of your story, they begin to reorganize it. They enter your life, and suddenly, things you thought were settled begin to move again. Old emotions you believed were buried rise to the surface. Wounds you thought had healed begin to speak again. Not because you are becoming weaker, but because something inside you is finally being seen with enough intensity to be felt fully. And that is where confusion begins, because you ask yourself why it hurts so much, why something that feels so meaningful also feels so destabilizing, why connection and pain seem to arrive together instead of separately. What you are actually experiencing is not contradiction, it is activation. They are not simply triggering emotion in you, they are revealing what was already there but unacknowledged. Every fear you avoided, every layer of protection you built, every version of yourself that learned to stay guarded, it all starts to respond to their presence, even in absence. And for a while, it can feel overwhelming, like your inner world is no longer staying neatly contained, like something is being rearranged without your permission, like the ground you stood on emotionally is no longer stable in the way it used to be. But what feels like breaking is often the beginning of becoming, because not all breaking is destruction. Some breaking is opening. Some breaking is what happens when something inside you finally expands beyond the limits it once accepted as normal. And in that expansion, something important begins to happen. You start seeing yourself more clearly, not only through pain, but through awareness, through emotional honesty, through the parts of you that can no longer stay hidden once they have been touched by something real. This is why such connections feel unforgettable, not because they simply belong to you, but because they revealed you to yourself in ways nothing else did. And once something has done that, it does not easily disappear from your inner landscape. It continues to exist as a turning point, a threshold, a moment where you were not the same before and after. And what comes next is often not immediate understanding, but integration. Subscribe so you don't miss these truths, because what comes next changes how you understand pain itself. Some people are not placed into your life to comfort you gently. They enter in a way that wakes you up. Not softly, not quietly, but in a way that makes you see yourself differently. They don't simply hurt you, they open you, and there is a meaningful difference between the two. Every argument that leaves your chest tight, every silence that feels heavier than any words ever could, every moment you feel like pulling away, yet something in you stays. None of it is random, it is unfolding with purpose, even when it doesn't feel like it in the moment. Because what if nothing is actually happening against you? What if everything is happening through you? There are connections that do not form by coincidence. They form through deeper alignment, through experiences that seem to pull two people into each other's awareness for reasons that are not immediately clear. And in that meeting, something begins to shift in both directions. They reflect back to you parts of yourself you may not have fully faced. The fears you avoided, the patterns you repeated, the emotions you learned to suppress. And in the same way, you reflect things back to them that they may not yet understand about themselves. It becomes a mutual unfolding, even if it arrives through intensity instead of ease. And yes, it can feel overwhelming. There are moments that feel too heavy to hold. Nights where emotion spills over without warning. Days where you question whether something so intense could ever be right. But alongside all of that, something else is also happening beneath the surface. You are changing, slowly, deeply, sometimes painfully, but undeniably. You become more aware of your own emotional truth, more honest with what you feel, more connected to parts of yourself that used to stay hidden. You start to notice that even the difficult moments are shaping you into someone more grounded, more awake, more real than before. This is the deeper process underneath it all. Not destruction, but transformation. Not punishment, but awakening. Not randomness, but a kind of emotional alchemy that reshapes how you understand connection itself. And then comes the final sign, the one that tends to bring everything into focus. The third sign is this. Life continues to rearrange circumstances in a way that keeps bringing your paths close again. This is where experience begins to feel less like chance and more like something being guided by an invisible rhythm. When two lives are deeply intertwined in meaning, separation rarely feels absolute. It feels more like a pause in a larger movement that has not yet completed itself. Time can pass. Long gaps can form. Communication can stop completely. You may even convince yourself that it is over, that the chapter has closed, that you have moved beyond it. And for a while, your life may even reflect that belief. But then something unexpected happens. An ordinary moment shifts in a way you didn't plan. A random day unfolds differently than you imagined, and suddenly, without warning, there is a reminder, sometimes subtle, sometimes undeniable. It might be a message that arrives at a strangely precise moment. A chance encounter in a place you never expected. A song that carries too much emotional weight to ignore. A scent, a name, a dream that feels more like memory than imagination. And in those moments, the mind searches for explanation. It tries to label it as coincidence, as probability, as randomness. But something deeper in you resists that explanation because it feels too aligned, too timely, too specific to be dismissed so easily. It feels like life is adjusting the path, not once, but repeatedly, as if certain connections are being held in motion even when everything on the surface suggests they should have ended. And this is where hope and uncertainty begin to coexist, because you are no longer fully convinced it is over, yet you are also not certain what it means. What you are experiencing is not necessarily a promise of return. It is the presence of unresolved resonance. Something within the connection has not fully settled, and so it continues to echo through timing, memory, and experience. And whether that leads back to each other in a physical sense or not, it leaves behind a truth that is harder to ignore. Some connections do not disappear simply because life moves forward. They remain part of your internal landscape. They shape the way you feel, the way you reflect, the way you understand attachment and change. And in that sense, they continue to exist, not always as a person in your daily reality, but as a chapter within your inner world that still influences how you see everything that comes after. Every reunion can feel like life is asking you a quiet but powerful question. Are you ready now? Have you understood what you were meant to learn? Have you grown enough to love in a way you couldn't before? Because the deeper truth is not what most people are told. Being meant for each other does not always mean being together at this exact moment in time. Sometimes it means distance. Sometimes it means delay. Sometimes it means both people being shaped separately before they can meet each other again in a healthier, fuller form. It can mean painful endings that teach you what real commitment actually requires. It can mean separation that forces you inward, back to yourself, so you stop looking for completion outside and start rebuilding it within. It can mean becoming emotionally whole on your own before you ever try to hold something shared again. And in that sense, nothing about it is wasted. The waiting is not punishment. The space is not rejection. The silence is not abandonment. It is preparation. Both lives are being refined in ways that are not always visible while it is happening. Old emotional patterns are being stretched. Inner wounds are being brought to the surface. Attachments are being tested, not to destroy love, but to transform the way love is understood and expressed. You are being shaped into someone who can hold depth without losing yourself in it. Someone who can feel intensely without falling apart. Someone who can love without confusion, without fear, without repeating what once hurt you, and they are going through their own version of that same process. That is why, sometimes, the connection does not fully disappear. It returns in waves. It shows up in thoughts, in timing, in memory, in unexpected emotional echoes that feel too precise to ignore, like the current of something unfinished, still moving underneath both of your lives. So, if it feels like they keep reappearing in your awareness, not always physically but emotionally, almost like a tide that never fully stops returning to the shore, don't dismiss it too quickly. There is a reason some experiences stay active inside you long after the external story seems paused. It is not always about prediction, it is about resonance. Something in you still recognizes something in them, even if life has not yet aligned the circumstances for that recognition to become action again. But here is what you must also understand clearly. Even if a connection carries depth, even if it feels meaningful, even if it feels destined in the way people describe these things, timing is still part of the journey, and timing often requires growth that cannot be rushed. There are things that only maturity can hold without breaking. There are versions of love that only become stable when both people have learned how to stay present without fear, without running, without losing themselves in intensity. So if these signs feel alive in your story right now, there is no need to panic and no need to force meaning into a shape that is not ready yet. Just breathe. Stop trying to control the direction of something that is still unfolding. Stop measuring every moment as proof or denial. Stop turning uncertainty into pressure. Your heart already understands more than your mind is currently able to organize. What you are feeling is not confusion in the way you think it is. It is awareness that has not yet fully settled into clarity. It is something real passing through layers of emotion, memory, and expectation all at once. So instead of chasing answers, shift your focus. Let go of the timeline you imagined. Release the need to know exactly how or when things are supposed to happen. Step out of the mental loop of waiting for a specific outcome to validate what you feel, and begin focusing on becoming someone grounded enough that love does not arrive as a question mark, but as something steady. You stop waiting for them to complete you, and you start becoming whole in a way that does not depend on whether they return or not. You build your life in a way that feels meaningful regardless of outcome. You grow in emotional clarity, self-respect, and inner stability until your presence alone carries enough peace that anything meant for you would not require chasing. Because when something is aligned, it does not require force. It does not require desperation. It does not require you to abandon yourself in order to hold on to it. And if a moment ever comes where both of you have truly grown into versions of yourselves that can meet without distortion, without confusion, without emotional chaos, then nothing will need to be chased. It will feel natural, familiar, like returning to something that never fully stopped existing in the background of your story. Until then, honor what you feel without letting it control you. Honor the ache, but do not let it define your direction. It is simply proof that you have the capacity to feel deeply, to attach meaningfully, to love sincerely. And those are not weaknesses, even when they hurt. Some connections stay inside you for a long time, not necessarily to keep you stuck, but to show you what depth feels like when you are no longer losing yourself in it. And whether that connection returns in physical form or simply remains as a chapter that shaped you, it still served a purpose in who you are becoming. This is Jungian truths. And here, even broken hearts begin to understand they were not breaking apart. They were breaking open.